Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible, verse by verse and chapter by chapter. I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're reading from a different Bible translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. We're going to continue in our study through the Gospel of Mark, and we're in chapter 5, verse 1. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, keep in mind, remember in chapter 4, Jesus had gotten into a boat and exhausted from ministry, he falls asleep on a pillow. A huge storm starts rocking the ship. It was flooding. And it was so bad that the disciples had awakened him and says, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" He got up and rebuked the sea and the wind, and everything became calm. So now they're reaching the shore here. And verse 2 says, "And as soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him." He lived in the tombs. No one was able to restrain him anymore, even with chains, because often he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he had snapped off the chains and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. And always, night and day, he was crying out in the tombs and in the mountains and cutting himself with stones. Now, this story here is probably the most severest case of demon possession that the gospel presents. And this man was in bad shape. We're going to see why in a moment, or at least what could be part of the reason. Again, demon possession is real. Jesus did not handle demon possession as if it was a mental illness or some type of chronic disease. Okay, so for example, epilepsy. Okay, that can cause convulsions and things like that. Demon possession is when demonic spirits possess a body. And the word possess there means that they completely take the body over. And so this man was completely out of control. Okay. And in this particular case, we see that he could not even be controlled, in that they had chained him. He would break the chains. And so there was some sort of superhuman strength about this man. Now, if you remember in one of the chapters, they accused Jesus of casting out devils by the prince of devils, Beelzebub, in which he had a flawless rebuke of that. It was stupid to even accuse him of that. But one of the things that Jesus had said was that if he was going to rob a house, then he would have to be strong enough in order to overpower the owners. And this is what we're going to see here. The fact that Jesus is able to overpower demons is going to prove his lordship. All right, verse 6 says, "When he saw Jesus, the demon-possessed man, from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him, and he cried out with a loud voice, 'What do I have to do? What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I beg you before God, don't torment me.' He had told him to come out of the man. Verse 8 again. For he had told him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.' And then he says, 'What is your name?'" Now, we kind of see, again, in telling a story, that he tells the gist of the story. In other words, he just sums it up, right? In other words, if we kind of step back, we can kind of get a clearer picture of what happened. That as Jesus saw this man, and however the contact was made, Jesus had commanded the demon to come out, and this man ran up on Jesus and knelt before him and says, "What do I have to do with you? Have you come to torment me?" And let me just say this, by the way, because if you watch Hollywood films, that they always present the demons as powerful and And they slap around the priests, and they slap around anyone who is a preacher or a man of God. Okay. And again, as we see here, they were terrified of Jesus. And there was no argument. There was no cursing Jesus out. They were terrified of him. Now, verse 9 says, "What is your name?" he asked. "My name is Legion," he answered them, "because we are many." Now, again, a legion was about a squadron of 6,000 soldiers. So what's kind of indicated here is that there could have been up to 6,000 demons in this man, which could answer why they couldn't control him, why there was superhuman strength displayed in him. Verse 10, "And he kept begging him not to send them out of the region." Now, a large herd of pigs was there feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so we may enter them." And he gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. And then the men who tended them ran off and reported it to the town and the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed by the legion sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Now, kind of interesting. A couple of things about this kind of story right here. Why were there people shepherding pigs in Israel when pigs were a forbidden food? So that could explain why Jesus gave the demons permission to enter into them. And it's kind of interesting that they ran down, they stampeded down and drowned into the water. And again, when you get into this whole subject of demonology, we don't have a lot of answers. And so I'm not going to kind of really try to fill in blanks when the scriptures themselves doesn't give us the answers. Like, for example, when they asked Jesus, "Don't send them out of the region," what does that mean? Well, we're not really given a lot of answers. Okay, so I'm not going to really get into it. Now, what was interesting is that Jesus had completely delivered the man. And he was sitting there dressed in his right mind. Remember, he had been naked. He had been cutting himself. But he was sitting there in his right mind. Verse 16, "Then the eyewitness described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told them about the pigs. And they began to beg him to leave their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed kept begging him that he would be with him. But he would not let him. Instead, he told him, 'Go back home to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you.' So he went out and begged and began to proclaim and Decapolis how much Jesus had done for them, and they were all amazed." Now, a couple of things about this unfolding here actually kind of amazing. I kind of like it. One question is, why were the people afraid? Probably because, when you have that kind of power come, there is a presence of holiness which automatically will bring conviction. That's probably why. And it's kind of interesting. Jesus didn't argue with him. He just left. But another thing is the man kept begging Jesus to be with him. He kept begging Jesus, "Can I be with you?" And sometimes I kind of wonder about that. I wonder about that. In other words, wouldn't he have been a great apostle? And yet Jesus did not allow him to come. But instead he said, "Go back to your hometown." So in some respects, it was a greater thing because the man was preaching. He was a living testimony to the grace of God, and he was preaching it to his own hometown. Verse 21, "When Jesus had crossed over again by the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the sea. And one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he kept begging him, 'My little daughter's at death's door. Come lay your hands on her so she can get well and leave.'" Now, Jairus, remember, he was a synagogue leader. Now, remember, Jesus is still up and around Galilee. And these synagogues were they wasn't temples, and they wasn't ever designed to replace the temple or to fill in for the temple, but they were places where Jews gathered, and they would read the law, they would taught, and they would pray, and things like that. Now, verse 24, so Jesus went with him, and the large crowd was following and pressing against him. Now, it was pressing, by the way. Keep in mind, Jairus said his daughter was at death's door. Verse 25, a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years and had endured much under many doctors, and she had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she was worse. Now, doctors, of course, didn't have the kind of knowledge that our doctors had. They had some. And what was sad, of course, is that notice she said that she spent all she had. I could go a lot of ways with that. Certainly with healthcare today, it's the same. But she had been in this condition for 12 years. And it's whatever this bleeding condition was. It was a bleeding condition. Verse 27, having heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his robe. For she said, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be made well. Instantly, the flow of her blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was cured of her affliction. And at once, Jesus realized in himself that power had gone out from him. And he turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my robes? Then his disciples said, you see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, who touched me? In other words, everybody's touching you. So he was looking around to see who had done this. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came with fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Now, her fear was justified. She was first of all, it was unlawful for her to come out in public with a bleeding condition. She had to isolate herself under the law. And so she probably feared that, can fear remember, the Pharisees were meticulous about the law. And so no doubt she was worried about that. She feared repercussions from that. Verse 34, daughter, he said to her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be free from your affliction. And so I think it's a wonderful thing as the proclamation of her freedom, not only, by the way, in the sense of her health, because in a sense she already had that, but the freedom from the condemnation that she feared for even coming out in public in her condition. Verse 35, while he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue's leader's house and said, your daughter is dead. Why bother to teach her anymore? Now you can imagine when they probably saw him, he probably saw them and said, he knew what was coming, right? Because why else would they have been there? Why else would those friends have come? But when Jesus overheard it, verse 36, when Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, don't be afraid, only believe. He did not let anyone accompany him except Peter, James, and John, James' brother. Now again, we'll see that he kept these three with him on most of the occasions. They were the chief eyewitnesses. They saw more than any of the other apostles. And they came to the leader's house and saw the commotion, people weeping and wailing out loud. And he went in and said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep. And then they started laughing at him. And he put them all out and took the child's father and mother and those who were with them, meaning Peter, James, and John, and entered the place where the child was. And then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha Kaum, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old, and they were utterly astounded. And then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And then he said that she should be given something to eat. Now, the common interesting here is that the woman had been suffering 12 years and this little girl was 12 years. That's just a common thing I noticed about this story. And again, when Jesus says, don't tell anyone, again, there's a lot of reasons why he would probably say that. Didn't want probably crowd control more than anything else. And then notice he said something should be given to her to eat, I guess being dead can take a toll on you. At any rate, all right, we're going to pick it up with chapter 6 next time, so we'll see you then.